A newborn baby cries in a hospital room in Paris. A newborn baby cries in a hospital room in Berlin. To you, both sounds are just crying, raw and universal, the same primal signal every human infant makes. But the real answer is far stranger than that, because those two cries are not actually the same sound at all. You've probably assumed a baby's cry is one of the few truly universal human sounds, something hardwired and identical everywhere, unaffected by culture, language, or geography. It seems obvious. A newborn hasn't learned anything yet. It hasn't heard a single word spoken back to it. How could its cry possibly be shaped by the language of the country it happened to be born into? And yet it is. Here's where it gets strange. In 2009, a researcher named Kathleen Wermke recorded and analyzed the cries of newborn babies in France and Germany, all less than a few days old. Using detailed acoustic analysis, her team measured the melodic contour of each cry, the way pitch rises and falls across the sound. What they found stunned the research world. French newborns cried with a rising melodic pattern, pitch climbing upward toward the end of the cry. German newborns cried with a falling pattern, pitch dropping downward instead. Those two patterns matched almost precisely the dominant intonation patterns of French and German speech itself. Think about what that means for a moment. Babies who had never spoken a single word, never consciously heard a sentence directed at them after birth, were already crying with an accent. So how is that even possible? Where would a newborn learn the melody of a language it hasn't been born into yet? This is where the story turns towards something happening long before birth. Your ears and a fetus's ears become functional remarkably early, roughly around 18 to 20 weeks into pregnancy. From that point forward, sound doesn't simply vanish at the edge of the womb. Low-frequency sound, and especially the melodic rhythm and intonation of a mother's voice, travels through amniotic fluid and tissue and reaches the developing baby, muffled but present, for months before birth. A separate landmark study by researchers Anthony DeCasper and William Pfeiffer, conducted decades earlier, showed that newborns could recognize and prefer the sound of their own mother's voice within hours of being born, compared to the voice of an unfamiliar woman. The babies had never consciously heard speech from outside the womb, and yet somehow something about that voice had already become familiar. Your brain, it turns out, doesn't wait for birth to start listening. It starts absorbing the melody of language while you are still floating in darkness, months before you take your first breath. Here's the counterintuitive twist. You might assume this early listening is just passive, sound simply reaching the fetus without doing anything meaningful yet. But a related body of research, including a 2013 study led by researcher Christine Moon, found that newborns as young as a few hours old could already distinguish between the vowel sounds of their native language and the vowel sounds of a foreign one, showing a measurable preference for the sounds they had been prenatally exposed to. The learning wasn't waiting for the outside world to begin. It had already been quietly underway the entire time, so by the time a baby takes its first breath and lets out that first cry, its vocal cords aren't producing a blank universal signal. They're already shaped, faintly but measurably, by months of absorbing the specific melodic fingerprint of the language surrounding it, carried through a mother's body before the baby ever had eyes open to see the world it was entering. Consider what this means about the boundary you've always assumed exists between before language and after language. You've probably imagined language acquisition as something that starts once a baby is born, once real words start reaching real ears in open air. But the evidence suggests the process starts earlier, quieter, and stranger than that, inside a body, through fluid and muscle and bone, absorbed not as vocabulary, but as music, rhythm, and melody, long before any of it means anything at all. Here's the modern mirror. Think about how much of what shapes you happens before you're even aware enough to notice it happening. The rhythms of the voices around you as an infant, the melodies of the language your family spoke before you could speak back. None of it asked your permission. None of it required your understanding. It simply arrived, absorbed by a nervous system that was listening long before there was a you there, yet to consciously listen back. A newborn baby cries in a hospital room in Paris. A newborn baby cries in a hospital room in Berlin. Two sounds so instinctive, so seemingly universal, that almost no one has ever thought to listen closely enough to hear what they're actually saying, that somewhere in the womb, months before either baby ever spoke a word, the melody of home had already begun, quietly writing itself into their voice.